if you came for cute pictures, hopefully you'll be appeased by that. There will be a little bit of a bait and switch because I hope that people can take something away from this that they can apply to, if not even their work life, but their personal life as well. Um, I'll kind of share a little bit about what my life has looked like over the last year and a half and some parallels that I've drawn between raising twins and kids in general and working in higher education. So this is kind of a 30,000 foot view of what this will look like over the next 30 to 60 minutes. 5 chapters, and just kind of break down by different things that I'll share and give some examples in each of those. Also, I think it's important to share a little bit about my influences on this presentation. So for those of you that aren't aware, I have been with Neosho County Community College since 2009. So I spent the first roughly 3.5 years on the Chinook campus working in student support services with low income, first generation, and disabled students on that campus. And then I relocated to the Ottawa campus in 2013, and I've been here ever since. I also have my Clifton strengths listed there, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about those, but you'll notice at the beginning of each chapter, there's a little clip of that. So if you are familiar with or you've taken Clifton Strengths Finder, you can relate to that throughout the presentation. If you've not taken it, I would encourage you to do that. I took it for the first time probably 2 years ago, and I found it to be really helpful in terms of kind of solidifying my approach to things and better understanding that. My background is in psychology and academic advising. So any of the theories or things that I talk about largely come from that you'll see today. And then the big picture there is my family. So Amanda, my wife, we were married in 2013, and then in the 6 years there, we've had 4 children. So our lives are busy, but they are a huge influence on some of the stories that you'll hear today and see. All right, so chapter 1 is expect the unexpected. And again, you'll see at the beginning of each chapter there the strengths finder. So this one ties back to one of my top 5 results, which was achiever, and you can read those at the beginning of each chapter. But expect the unexpected, really this section is going to be about just being open to and reframing the unexpected, but also the benefit of that anticipation. I think a lot of times when we think of the word anticipation, we think of nervousness or anxiety, not so much in that sense, but more in the planning and preparedness sense is what I want to focus on. So one theory that I came across in learning my student development track in my master's program was the transition theory, and it really stands out to me. It's something that I've used in advising. Transition, they define it as any event or non-event that results in changed relationships, routines, assumptions, and roles. And the thing that really stood out to me the first time I encountered this was non-event. I think we all tend to get caught in that way of thinking that a single event or moment in time are the things that impact our lives the most, when we don't spend as much time thinking about what didn't happen and how that can also impact and shape our experiences. So can anybody offer a non-event that you can think of? If not, that's okay. I'll give you a couple seconds here.
Why don't you give us an example?
Okay, so a non-event, if we look at the next slide here, down on sub-point 3 there on number 2, COVID, I think, provides abundance of examples of non-events. So if you think back over the last year, think of all of the different stories that you've heard about weddings, for example, somebody who had planned a wedding and it didn't get to happen. Maybe it was delayed. Maybe it didn't happen yet. But that's a perfect example of a non-event. Something that somebody has built anticipation for that doesn't happen can also have impact on a person's life. And that's one part of a transition or potential transition. So events themselves, which we tend to think of more, you can break down into anticipated and unanticipated. So those are a little bit easier to think of. Events that are anticipated would maybe be the wedding that I just mentioned. You think of you plan a wedding, it goes through, everything is great. Maybe something that's unanticipated would be getting laid off of work. So when we're working with students coming into some of our programs, a lot of times that's the impetus for them coming to Neosho to begin with, is maybe they've had a change in their line of work and they're seeking out new opportunities. So that would be an example of an unanticipated event. So it's something that happened that they weren't planning on. And then again, the non-events. So things that don't happen that maybe you were anticipating. These can be personal to you, but they can also impact you when it's somebody close to you. That would be a ripple. Resultant, like we just mentioned, the example of COVID, would be something that didn't happen as a result of something else. And then delayed would be just pushing that off, postponing that, which again, we can probably all think of plenty of examples of that over the last year. So tying back to my own experience with twins, we had really a little bit of each of these in that experience. So we were anticipating a pregnancy, so that was an anticipated event. We weren't planning on twins, so that was obviously unanticipated. So the gravity of that was pretty real. But we also had kind of a non-event take place too. We went for an early appointment once we had confirmed it was twins, so they had us meeting with specialists pretty early on. And in one of those early appointments, they saw a marker that was consistent with trisomy 18, which a lot of times isn't consistent with life beyond birth, after birth. So that was a pretty real scenario where we had already went through the surprise stage of envisioning our life with twins, and then thinking about not having one of those twins potentially would have been an example of a non-event. They're both healthy today. They're doing great. Show some video evidence of that throughout here, but that would have been a very real example of a non-event that we had planned for and then didn't happen. So further on transition theory, it provides us with the 4 S's. So kind of a way, going back to my advisor mindset of developing a line of questioning, working with students. We've probably all heard examples of these statements you see over to the right. Now's not the right time. Maybe I'll try it again later. I don't think this is for me. And a lot of times those are reasons to drop classes or leave programs or stop out. But the situation of the 4 S's, I think really helps me with sometimes developing that line of questioning. So when did you notice that this started to become true? What was the timing? What else was going on? Was there a change in your roles? Did your role at work or at home change? How long has this been going on? Have you experienced this before? I think those 8 subpoints of situation are really helpful for me when I'm thinking about how to ask questions to get more information from students to better provide them resources. So they also talk about self and what your support system is and what strategies you already know or have identified to work through a transition. But I feel like the situation aspect is the most helpful for me. So Sally Suja also works in the TLC, and her and I, a number of years ago, really started to notice this non-event shock with students who were working towards a program and then weren't accepted. And it really was kind of eye-opening to us because we were finding out that they hadn't even anticipated the possibility that it wouldn't be accepted. They hadn't done any alternative planning. They hadn't thought about what would happen next if they weren't accepted, which we all know there's a number of things you could do. You could identify a different program. You could work to apply again the following period. You could have what we decided was really helpful was have a dual path developed early on. So for a lot of our pre-programmed students, we talk to them about, let's also at the same time show you how this fits into an Associate of Science. You're working towards two things at once, and then if you're not accepted in, you're set up well to continue on with degree progress towards a number of different things. So this is an example of helping students anticipate a transition in the form of a non-event that a lot of times I think they're more blind to than events themselves. I would also argue that all students are arriving at Neosho in transition. So some of them anticipate coming to Neosho, they've planned for it for maybe months or years. Others, it might be unanticipated. Maybe it was them again being laid off of work. Maybe they weren't accepted at another college. Maybe their travel to relocate to another college fell through, or they're waiting, delaying that. Or maybe it's a resultant non-event, like we've talked about. But I would argue that all of our students are in some sort of transition. So I'm going to share just a short clip of a video here. I used this video in my first year seminar class. We talk about goal setting, and part of that, one of the assignments that I have them do in class is to, after they've set a short to midterm goal of their own, identify at least two obstacles that they could see happening to impede that, but then also generate at least two resources or strategies to overcome each of those obstacles individually. So this video actually is a longer video. It's about 20 minutes long, that talks about this person's journey towards doing a marathon swim from Cuba to Florida. But this 2 to 3 minutes segment here talks about kind of the science behind how her body and her brain gear up for this type of a response.
What we will do is we will create a map of the brain that compares you, A, to some of the performers, and B, to a healthy control group. And it will basically show you where your brain was more or less active. And then we link that to the function that this brain release do. What is particularly interesting here for us is how an amazing individual like her is able to process physiological stressors. Because in order to accomplish what she has accomplished, she had to overcome incredible physiological stressors. The goal of the research really is to identify the mechanisms in these individuals and then to hopefully find ways of teaching the different way of how these individuals process information to learn problems.
Okay, so how are you doing in there?
Just fine.
Excellent. So again, we will be doing a series of what's called localizing scans for about the first 5 minutes.
It's a direct physiological challenge during brain imaging. You basically are breathing through a tube, and suddenly we put a resistor between your breathing in and the outside world. So what that means is it almost feels like you're breathing through a straw. We have to perform what's called a continuous performance task. It's a very simple task. We show an arrow that either points to the left or right hand side, and she has to again push a button. If the arrow points to the left, she has to push that button. If it points to the right, she has to push the right button. We change the background of the arrow that she sees. And when that background color changes, she knows that there's about a 1 in 4 chance that in about 9 to 12 seconds, she may experience inspiratory breathing load. What that means is it gives us this 9 to 12 seconds time frame to check what is the brain doing during that time. Because we're interested in not only how does the brain respond to a challenge, but also how it gets ready for a challenge. And so we can basically look at the anticipatory interval and at the breathing load itself. One of the most exciting aspects of the finding with Diana is that in one particular brain area, she actually did even better than the Navy SEALs. And this is what we call the perigenial anterior cingulate cortex. It's an area that's very important for emotion regulation. In anticipation of the breathing stimulus, she brings this area online to a degree that is significantly more so than the Navy SEALs or the Marines. So one way to think about this is that she emotionally prepares herself to regulate the experience of the aversive stressor before the stressor occurs. And as a consequence, again, when this stressor actually occurs, she activates the areas less because she basically has already prepared herself for it. In summary, what we're finding is that in response to this physiological stressor, her brain better prepares herself. She responds less to the actual stressor itself, and she activates a brain area that is very important for emotion regulation.
So I'm really glad that they didn't restrict my breathing load when they told me that we're having twins. But I think this is a really cool video in that it kind of gives some scientific background and some evidence for just the very step of us thinking about a potential stressor and then preparing for it in some sense, whatever that may be, can really decrease the amount of stress at the time that it actually happens. So if we go back to the example of Sally and I working with students on that shock factor when they find out they're not accepted. If we've already had a conversation a year prior about what we would do in this scenario if you don't get accepted, we already have a plan for it. So they just immediately go into plan B mode and look at next steps. So what courses can I take to further increase my chances? What courses can I take to better prepare for transfer? What additional courses can I take to be ready for an alternative program? Whichever one they maybe have chosen, at least they have some sense of what's next instead of having that crisis mode as their next step. So there's also happenstance learning theory, and this one I especially like because it really has us incorporate chance into our life. So chance events or opportunities or things, again, that we haven't planned for, but anticipating and understanding that those things happen. We're constantly being afforded new opportunities, and a lot of times we are blind to them because we already have a plan, and that's not part of the plan. So this whole theory is really just training people to be more receptive to those opportunities and open to the possibility that it might open up a new door. So in the academic example for advising, one example that I use a lot is rather than just taking your degree requirements, what can you do on the side to get involved? Whether it's shadowing, interning, doing informational interviews, clubs or organizations, being a lab assistant. For me personally, I credit a large part of where I landed in higher ed now to my last 2 years of quote unquote experience opportunities in the psychology department that I had never planned for. They weren't part of my degree requirement, but I got an email in my inbox and thought it sounded interesting, so I decided to participate. So if you can remember a few slides ago, that wonderful picture of us all smiling, getting ready to go on our trail bike ride. This is Denny here, so she's not a twin. She's the only only daughter here, but she's also probably our toughest child. So she was pretty happy at this moment. We're getting ready to set out on this bike adventure. And less than 2 minutes in, I look back and she starts to kind of veer towards the side of the bike trail. So she was behind me at that point. And if you're familiar with any of the rail trails, they have those sharp embankments on both sides because it's a old railroad. She sped up pretty quickly and disappeared into what I remember as looking something similar to this. I finally dug through the brush and she was upside down and her legs were all twisted. She wasn't even on her bike. I was expecting something much worse, but when she finally got upright and looked around, for some reason she saw this and said, "Oh, I didn't know this was down here." And I think that's just a perfect example of, this was not something we had planned on our bike adventure, but she saw that and looked at it completely differently. And in her mind, for some reason, she's thinking, we should come back here. I don't know why. I don't know why. We haven't been back. I think, though, that these really all steal from the earlier child development or developmental psychologist that doesn't get enough credit here. I was reading this just the other day and noticed this quote in here, and I thought that actually fits perfectly with those other theories that we were just talking about. So that was probably the longest chapter. These next few might be a little bit quicker, but number 2 here is listening to cues. So the thing that I've found probably the most surprising with twins and parenting in general is that everybody is presenting you a different cue at a different time, and nobody's experiencing what should be the same, in my eyes, the same way. They're all living under the same roof, same influences, same environment, but at any given point, there are 4 different personalities. An example of that, you got a kind of a side-by-side here. There's just as many, if not more, differences between Ladd and Marshall at this point than there are similarities, despite, the things that we're controlling, keeping similar, their differences are just as great, if not more. So I think relating that to working with students again is just a reminder that even though on paper they might look the same, they're really bringing an entire background of things that are different and along the spectrum that you can't fully expect a one-size-fits-all approach to always hit home with everybody or be the right fit. Number 3 is zone defense. So if you're not familiar with zone defense in an athletic sense, it's covering an area instead of a person. So, we were very easily able to focus on one-on-one attention with our first 2 kids. We would sometimes separate and take them each individually and do something for the day. Now we're just in a full zone defense all the time. So we're covering an area, and a lot of times shouting out back and forth across the house, so-and-so is moving this direction, I'm going downstairs, communicating back and forth as to what we're covering. We took that very literally when we were planning a remodel in the middle of expecting the twins. So we actually tore down barriers. So the biggest question that we got when we told everybody that we were doing a renovation when we were expecting twins, we had already planned for this before we knew we were having twins, but everybody wanted to know how many bedrooms we were adding. We were like, no, we're not. They can share bedrooms. We're going to tear down walls so that we can see what everybody's doing in the living room. So that was our concrete example of creating a better zone area so that we can play defense better at home. But can you imagine if we had a man-to-man defense in higher ed? If we had one person assigned to each student who would help with admissions, advising, registration, financial aid, instruction, all of those services that we offer, not only is it not feasible from a training and financial standpoint, we'd probably get tired of each other if we just had the one person that we were tracking the entire time and trying to help. So obviously in higher ed, we're always working a zone defense. Our specialty or our department becomes our zone, but that really doesn't work unless we, one, have knowledge of the entire coverage overall, and two, trust that other coverage and work together. So I hear the silo mentality a lot, and I think it's even a bigger factor over the last year, when you can't get out as much and see other people or go office to office or walk across campus maybe as much as we had in the past. So I think it's just an important reminder, to do some things proactively to try to guard against that. Um, some of those might be learning, just taking an opportunity to learn about what the other zone or department does. I can think of some specific examples. In the Ottawa staff meeting over the last couple of years, at different times, we've done a departmental highlight, and they've done those in supervisor training. I know different departments have done that before too. The bigger departments maybe break down and have each smaller piece go through and share a little bit about what their operations are. And I think that's helpful. Communication really is the big one for me, just communicating anytime that I'm referring a student to another office, just giving them a heads up saying, hey, I've sent so-and-so over your way, or I've instructed so-and-so to contact you, just so that they can give a heads up and you're connecting that loop so that if they don't show up, then maybe they can follow up with me and let me know as well so I can circle back to the student. I think too, just a reminder to rely on our zone coverage a little bit more when a department's down or when somebody's overwhelmed. Again, this is something that I feel like has happened more in the last year than even before. So just kind of recognizing that or being aware of there might be times when another area is stressed and seeing what you can do to maybe help with that. And then one thing that I think can easily be overlooked is forming committees without getting the right parties involved. So the question that I kind of asked myself beforehand is, who are we going to need to ask input or questions from if we don't have them on the committee? Because if you have a list of people or departments that you feel like you're going to constantly be going back for more input or more feedback, they should really just be on the committee at that point. So just kind of asking that question at the beginning instead of after you've picked people for a committee can save a lot of time and make sure you're getting the right feedback. All right, so number 4, chapter 4 is using data to inform decisions. So one of the things that I've found fun over the last year and a half is making graphs to represent being a parent of twins. This is actually one of the functional graphs that I've created. So this is just tracking their weight over time. But we actually ended up using it practically to inform a decision. And so how we did that was they were getting to about the 6-month mark where we historically had introduced solids, but they were 4 months premature. So then everyone cautions you about the adjusted age developmentally. So are they really ready to take on whole foods at that point? So what we decided to do, we talked to our doctor too, and kind of suggested we could play it by ear, go either way with it, either starting at 6 months or waiting till 7. But around that same time, they were starting to widen the gap in their weight. And Marshall, who was baby B, the smaller of the two, was also a little bit more irritable. So we were thinking that maybe he was not getting as much as he needed. So we introduced solids. He was able to, I think, better control what he was getting at that point. And you can see then through the 1-year mark, they pretty much aligned. So just kind of an entertaining snippet here of trying to cook while also feeding twins at the same time. This is in real time. That's what it feels like. If only it was really that efficient. They are especially good eaters, so it is hard to keep up. So there's some other examples. I don't know if you can read those very well. My favorite one, though, that I came up with, I think, was the pandemic life graph in the top left. So my theory here is that your ability to remain stable or percentage of days stable during a pandemic depends on how long you've lived your life in a pandemic. The twins have done great. They don't really know anything different. So they've just been good infants, good toddlers. Deacon and Denny, they're 4 and 6. They're about 50-50. Some days they hate the world, and other days they don't mind, social distancing and staying at home and things like that. Parents, about 10% of the time were stable, trying to work through this. So there's some other examples there too, but it's just kind of fun way to use data to make things interesting. But why do we really use it? One, to see where you've been. That's why I was doing the weight tracking until it actually became functional. It was fun to look back and see where they'd been and the trajectory. It provides context. But I think most importantly, it allows us to recognize when to make adjustments. So I have a couple of examples from advising that I'll share. One is from the employee survey. So you can see dating back to 2007 through 2016. On the employee survey, the adequate resources exist for academic advising. In the green was one of the 5 worst in 2016. And then effectiveness, this is from the Noel Levitz. So this is rated by the students, not the employees. There's a number of different things here, but you can tell after 2016 to 2018, every single one of those dropped. So there could be other factors going on, but the important takeaway is it dropped. So using that information to maybe guide or frame an approach. So in fall of 2017, my position changed a little bit to have a little bit more responsibility over advisor training college-wide instead of just on the Ottawa campus. I didn't feel like we had inadequate resources for academic advising. I felt more that they weren't communicated or shared or centrally located. So my first approach was to just start sharing information. And then second after that was to have a centrally located place on my Show for a more uniform training. So those things were implemented 2019 and 2019. It was rebounded to one of the best scores it had ever reported on the employee survey, and academic effectiveness on the Noel Levitz. All of them had a jump back up. So was there a direct relationship? Was it causal? No, I don't think so. But the point being, the takeaway being that I looked back and reflected on data to come up with a plan to try to address. So what are you using? It's just kind of a rhetorical question to what are you using to guide your decision making? I have some examples there that I think we're probably all fairly familiar with through in-service trainings, different meetings that were in the Noel Levitz and the employee survey I just shared. There's also the dashboard. At the course level, we have things like our assessments or course evals. I know a lot of instructors informally will use polls just to gauge understanding within a class period. But you might think about what you're doing at the individual student level or at the department level on your own to guide your decision making. So number 5, chapter 5 is adapt and learn. So this is one of my favorite memories / least favorite from the twins right when we were being released from the NICU, and they were disconnected from all of their tube feedings and all of the extra support they had. And then we roomed in, and then over the next couple of days, obviously had them on our own at home. It was much like a NASCAR race, trying to prep, because there was breastfeeding, pumping, and also bottle feeding, supplemental, because they weren't getting enough. They were still too premature to get what they needed. So we were essentially doing 3 feedings each cycle, which left about 45 minutes to an hour of sleep before the next cycle would start. The first couple of rounds, but we, through trial and error and learning, worked that out to where we could give us a little bit more time in between each. So it's really just an example of an adaptive challenge, and just about everything that we face in higher education is adaptive challenge. We have very few problems that are easy to identify with quick and easy solutions. It's usually going back a step or two to understand why, and then seeing which departments it impacts. So just again, a kind of a reminder to treat our challenges more as adaptive challenges, and take the extra steps sometimes that are needed to address it fully. So another quick example was our current placement policy. It's been a new policy now for, I think we're in our 2nd full year. But rewinding back to 2015, we had Compass announced that they were dropping their placement testing. So it was an ACT product that was pulling their product from the market, and that's what we used to place students. So we developed a committee over the next few years, and 30+ meetings. We had change platforms. We also had a version of AccuPlacer change. We had KBOR step in and provide recommendations after we had developed cut scores, so we had to adjust those. And then we had 8 different pilot model variations that our committee discussed, and 2 pilot years and 1 policy change. So again, another example of an adaptive challenge. There was always moving parts, had a lot of input from a lot of different departments, and just working through that to get the feedback that we needed to make the right decisions. It was not a quick, easy solution. It took place over 3 or 4 years. So other adaptive challenge, obviously, again, we go back to COVID as a pretty salient example over the last year. We've all experienced everybody's individual interpretations of how to respond. There's no one single solution. If you have heard Dr. Inbody talk about the 19 different community colleges had 19 different responses and approaches to handling COVID. So there's no clear choice. It depends so much on your own institution, and it's fluid and changing with the circumstances. So we kind of come back to where we started here. We're chapter 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. You can kind of see arranged more differently here. So just a summary of chapter 1, we are anticipating and preparing. 2 was really about understanding with empathy, communication with 3. 4 was reflection before reaction or planning, and then innovation with chapter 5. But it doesn't really stop there either. They are all connected in some way. And one example I would give is, obviously, if you're using data to inform your decisions and reflecting, you can use that a lot of times to better anticipate and prepare a response. And then it just continues around the circle there. So they all very much play together. I do have the resources, and happy to share the longer resources or the slides if anybody, if you're interested, and would take any questions after the video though. So this is Marshall, this is baby B, who at one point we were suspecting might have trisomy 18. So he's very much healthy, and this was a couple of months ago when we actually were able to capture on video his first walk. So let's enjoy that. Plus Deacon's play-by-play.
Can you steal that toy too? He'll walk. All the way over to us.
Wow, Mars. Good job, buddy. What you got left?
So I don't know if you remember back several slides ago, one of the key differences between these two, so Marshall I listed was the kinesthetic learner. He likes to get in and start trying things. He usually does not do them correctly the first time, but he'll do it first. Lad, on the other hand, will sit back and observe. So you saw him there like, that looks pretty cool. And then 3 weeks later, he tried it. So that's very much their approach to life. One jumps right in and the other one lets him make the mistake and does it the right way a few weeks later. So, but I will take, if there's any questions, happy to answer those, but otherwise that is it.
I do have one question. How much it is my responsibility to talk to a student when I don't feel they're moving on and they've kind of gotten stuck and they're maybe giving up?
So the question really is kind of as an instructor, where the line is drawn in terms of kind of proactively or intrusively advising or reaching out to the student.
Yeah.
I think that's a good question. I think for me, it would go a little bit back to your own comfort level. So certainly if it is crossing over into the realm of anything that's more counseling related, just knowing that we do have a counselor resource. But anytime that you have a question about it, I would say you're welcome to contact me or Andrew if it's the Chanute campus, or either of us for online. But I never think it's a bad idea to just reach out and check in. Like, I haven't seen you active in the course, or I haven't seen, you missed this deadline, things like that. I don't know if you're thinking of something more specifically.
Well, it is. It's a student that she's been working on this. I teach court reporting, and she's been in this course for almost 2 years, I believe. And she works full time too, and she's really stuck. And she took a summer off, which was, and I don't know how much I should get into this, but now she's kind of not motivated at all. And I'm wondering when I should touch base with her to see if she thinks she wants to dig down deep what that she needs to really do, if she wants to continue on with this course, and if getting out and getting her certifications is what she wants to do. I mean, I don't know. I don't know how much to talk to her about that.
Yeah. I mean, so I think a lot of it, again, goes to your comfort level, but I think also it's how it's presented. If you have them in front of you and you're able to talk to her, even if it's by email or phone or Zoom or whatever, if you're able to just genuinely check in and say, how's this still go? Is this working for you? Like, is this still something that you feel like you're interested in? I'm kind of showing that you're interested as long as she is. I mean, I think that's the hardest part for me in advising is sometimes I find myself caring or trying harder than the student.
Yeah.
And it's not a fun feeling.
Yeah.
But I think sometimes just checking in, like you said, and just approaching it in a way that says, is this still working? Is this the right setup? Are you still gaining anything from this? Is this still what you're interested in?
Okay.
and letting them know that you're there to help them as long as they are. I mean, the alternative side of that is, kind of the harsher, snarkier, do you still want to do this? I
Yeah, I
think a
know.
lot of it is how it's presented, and
Yeah.
and
Oh,
they'll read on that.
thank you. Yeah, it was, yeah, without telling her, I think we need to come to Jesus meeting.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay,
Yep.
that helps.
Any other questions? Okay. Well, thank you. I appreciate you guys coming today. And if you do have questions you think of, or want anything more in depth, like the full link to the video on the anticipatory response or any of those articles, I can send those to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kyle. And thank you everyone for coming.
You're welcome.
I will be posting this up on our instructors videos on YouTube. So thank you guys.